So I'm Michelle. I'm the event coordinator for Savannah Institute. I'm so glad that you all are joining us this afternoon or this early morning. Some quick housekeeping. Erik's going to be doing this virtual farm tour with you all for probably about the first 30-45 minutes, and there will be time for questions at the end. To submit your questions, you can either unmute yourselves and make it more of a informal conversation, which we definitely love it when you do that, or you can type them in the chat. Don't use the question and answer section, just use the chat section. And then we just ask that everyone stay muted throughout the presentation so there's no other background noises. So go ahead and make sure that you are muted. And yeah, Erik, take it away.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. My name is Erik Hagan. I'm the farm director for the Savannah Institute, based here in Southwest Wisconsin. It's been my honor this past year to manage this Silverwood County Park and get to know the folks here that I'll present about. Just to be transparent, this is my first year. I wasn't here at planting or the design and decision of this. So I'm going to try my best to speak to the community process. I see there's a few folks on the webinar that actually are part of the process and do most of the work out at Silverwood. So want to make a nod to them, and hopefully we get to hear from them at the end. I have a very long presentation, as always. I'm going to try to keep it really short so we can get to some Q&A and really start to engage in some of these better conversations, I think, than me just talking at you. Ideally, this would have been an in-person event, but unfortunately, given the circumstances, we get a slideshow. So, and given the season, you know, it would have been nice to go out and video this, but you'll be looking at brown leaves and, you know, harvested ground. So, well, to get started, this conversation's about Silverwood County Park and the alley crop and agroforestry demonstration site out there. For some reason, I can't move my slide. There you go. Silverwood County Park is an education and resource park based in Edgerton, Wisconsin, whose mission is to educate the public on broad and diverse aspects of Wisconsin agriculture, past, present, and future. So they're really engaged in participating and actively growing a very innovative agricultural park to not just nourish and feed the community, but also provide a place for enhancing land access and public engagement and consumer engagement into the agricultural system. The park was originally founded through a donation by Irene Silverwood in 2003, who asked that the park definitely be preserved for agricultural education as well as passive recreation. As mentioned, it's in Edgerton, Wisconsin. It's a pretty awesome location. And we'll continue. And the bulk of the county park, if folks aren't aware of the park system here in Dane County, they're managed by what are called Friends groups, and the Friends of Silverwood Park are extremely engaged. And it's been such an awesome time working with these folks and getting to know this program, being someone not from the state, and getting to know a public park system that puts it back into the hands of the community and those that live and work near the park system to actually manage and engage and develop the park is pretty phenomenal. This is a really true way to put the lands back into the communal and common places perspective. These folks came up with a pretty awesome and extensive master plan. That's not what this presentation is about because it's so extensive. I don't even know half of it. I'm excited to be a part of it and start to engage this past year. But it's a 300-acre site with a tremendous amount of natural resources and opportunities for a lot of engagement. They're working with a organic row cropper, so they've converted all the fields or are currently in transitioning all the fields into organic cropping system. In the past, they've done a lot of really exciting switchgrass for biomass production and conservation benefits. A big research project there on the west side of the property. And that's being now replaced with a pretty substantial heirloom apple orchard for research and kind of preservation of heirloom varietals there. There's also a 10-acre incubator farm pilot where a number of different growers are starting their ag businesses on site and are able to sell and engage and grow from there and learn from each other. And then there's about 60 acres of natural areas for equestrian, cross-country skiing, hiking, yada, yada, all the good stuff. And they're doing an excellent job maintaining the property, clearing invasives, restoring oak woodland savannas and pollinator habitats. It's a pretty awesome, fast-moving project. The soil is in the glaciated portion of Wisconsin, so there's a lot of the kettle moraines and glacial till deposits, and it's right alongside two lakes, Rice Lake and Sweet Lake, and a lot of the fields really drain directly into Rice Lake, which is a pretty major conservation of conservation importance. And this is kind of where the organic approach really kind of came to mind, as I understand it from the Friends group, to focus on organic production for the conservation benefit of the environment, but also the community. But they also recognize that the standard conventional approach is not enough. It's a immediate process. It's incredibly important, but there's so much more that we can do. And one of those was to engage with Savannah Institute and look at a system of agroforestry, where we're converting annual systems and increasing perenniality, herbaceous species into woody, getting away from this monoculture production at larger scale and into polycultures. And trying to create closed loop systems where there's more engagement between the participants and the interactions on the farm. And with Savannah Institute, this was a really great opportunity for us to enhance our education and resource base. One of the things we're trying to do throughout the Midwest is work with county parks and private landowners to develop these demonstration sites to kind of enhance, our research and figure out how we do agroforestry in the Midwest, but also how do we educate the public base to push this along forward and get landowners and agricultural producers and conservation groups to start considering a more managed approach within agricultural landscapes. So we have a number of demonstration sites throughout the Midwest that have started taking shape the past couple of years, and every year we keep growing and growing, and it's getting quite extensive and really successful. So we're really starting to excitedly engage with the public park systems, which for me is really important. For us, it's really important. One, it's engaging local communities and agricultural producers and landowners to be able to go to a site and watch these changes over time. But also it provides a unique method for land access for the community that are looking for farming opportunities or engagement opportunities. These public parks have an awesome opportunity. They're common places. They're owned by the people and by the community. And so it's really getting back into this common land ownership and common land management process where we get to really explore these innovative ideas, kind of capture the community engagement and education, but also idea development, and really start to develop things that are very locally specific to the community. And they act as what we're calling go first farms, where we can kind of start planting these systems at scale to really trial and error and work out the kinks of how they work. And if they do work, and even starting the marketing process so that we can start scaling the system up so other farmers can be more successful as they start to implement these systems as well. So we started here with a 15-acre site right at the entrance to the park. When you drive in, it's that whole 15-acre field right there to your right. Because of the layout of the site, we decided to focus on 3 systems: alley cropping, windbreaks, and a food forest. Alley cropping because we're working with a large-scale organic row cropper to manage the majority of the land. Windbreaks because it is constantly windy out there, and in order to watch the changes of what windbreaks and tree buffers can do on a site, this was a really excellent site to see that process happen. And then the food forest idea was to plant a site, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but plant a site for the more community engagement, more diversity, community gathering spaces, and that sort of thing. And it goes in line with the park's goal of implementing facilities for agricultural education. So it's kind of the start of landscaping for that sort of thing. So the design that the there was this whole process of facilitated design working with the Friends group and community members. And the design that was decided on for this initial planting is shown here. Alley cropping of chestnuts and elderberries and timber of hybrid poplar and walnut. The tasting orchard to the north, which is closer to the old homestead facilities. And then the windbreak over on the east side, as you can see there. We started last spring, or sorry, 2 springs ago, spring of 2019. As you can see, it was a blank field. We drilled in the cover crop, or the ground cover that I'll talk about in a moment. First thing, just to get some perenniality established in the system. And then we came back through with a mechanical planters or hand planting, depending on the tree crop. So the pull behind planter, the tree planter works very well, specifically only with bare root trees. And so that was done on most of the trees except for the chestnuts. And then a huge volunteer base came out and planted by hand all of the chestnut trees, which, there's about 1,100 linear feet, or about 3,300 linear feet of chestnut. So it was quite a project and undertaken by all of those folks. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the alley cropping system. Alley cropping, as probably most of you are aware, is a system of integrating trees with annual cropping system. Or a perennial hay system. So basically a ground cover or annual grain, corn, soy, vegetables, anything that's kind of produced in the alleys. And then trees in linear rows to kind of maintain the efficiency of that production. These can be planted on contour, they can be planted in curves. It just entirely depends on the context of the site and the operation. And then the idea is to transition over time into maybe something more of a full 100% perennial system of either hay harvest, forage harvesting, or actual grazing. And I'll get to that in a few moments as well. So as you can see here, this is taken this year. The cooperator we worked with planted sunflowers. This is the first year that this field is certified organic, which is really exciting. So we had a really great crop of sunflowers. Last year was in soy. And so as you can see here, we have the windbreak on the east, or the right side of your screen, 2 rows of black currants, 3 rows of chestnuts that are set up in a randomized chestnut varietal trial. I'll speak to that in a moment. And the western side of the field, or sorry, the east side of the field, I'm looking backwards, on your left side of the screen is in timber production, so black walnut and hybrid poplars. So as mentioned, we work with a really great cooperator, Dudloff Farms. He farms a couple thousand acres organically across the region and is doing pretty tremendous amount of work on research and education on organic farming systems for the area. So he's a fantastic partner to work with and trial and error these larger scale systems with in the community. The chestnut varietal trial is super exciting. We have 15 different cultivars, all primarily either full Chinese or a Chinese hybrid. The hybrids are a complex of American, European, and Chinkapin genetics. So it's kind of a good smattering, and we're really trialing for cold hardiness and productivity up here in the more northern climates. There's 3 rows, 1,100 feet each, and each tree is planted 20 feet apart. Originally, we planted them, interplanted elderberries within the row, but as I'll kind of get to in a few moments, the soils are pretty challenging for elderberry. They're really ideal for chestnuts, pretty marginal for elderberry. So we've had some luck with that, but not in the way that we had kind of initially hoped, which ultimately is okay. I think we've learned that this in-row polyculture is actually, in later term management, it becomes really difficult in terms of harvesting. So ideally what we're looking at systems now is alley cropping with 1 or 3 rows, where the 2 outer rows are the shrub of some sort of fruiting or small nut bearing shrub, and then the middle row is the kind of climax canopy species like walnut or chestnut or that sort of thing. So hopefully there'll be some good questions around the chestnut varietal trial there. Moving on to the timber alley crop, we had alternated black walnut with hybrid poplars. The hybrid poplars act as nurse trees to get the black walnuts to grow tall and straight for a preferred timber crop. And this is in kind of an experimental design of a single row alley crop or single row timber alley crop to kind of minimize the loss of ag land, but still maintain that kind of potential timber crop. The trees here are planted 10 feet apart with ultimately 20 feet between black walnuts. I forgot to mention the chestnuts are planted 20 feet apart with ultimately the ideal spacing there would be 40 feet apart for when we're in full mature nut production. Timber alley crop, similar with the chestnuts, with the polyculture planting I described. Ideally, there would be, you can plant one or more rows to help with that kind of the nurse tree idea. Also, you could similarly plant nut and fruit bearing shrubs on either side that can be mechanically harvested while the timber crop is being forced to grow straight into a good timber form. So we're working more with the multiple row idea in Illinois right now and hoping to demonstrate more of that in Wisconsin, but here we decided to go with the single row. Ground cover is of incredible importance in an alley crop. Alley cropping, we tend to always talk about the trees, but we need to always remember about the ground cover. Here we did a perennial Dutch white clover. We chose this because of its tolerance to being within an ag setting, tolerance to some light cultivation. It's very easy to manage. I mowed this site twice this season. Clearly this isn't, this is after the first one. Or maybe even before the first one actually, where some of the winter cover crop was coming up through. It has incredible weed suppression. I'm pretty happy with the density and how quickly it filled in. This is after year one. So we've got a very thick mat of ground cover, and it really does help to kind of maintain moisture retention, especially in droughty sites. But it also really helps with soil management, which I'll get to in a few moments as well. Our alleys are planted at 80 feet apart. Mark Dudlaw's equipment is 40 feet wide. He has kind of standardized width of all his planting and cultivating equipment. Because he is organic, he does do a lot of ground cultivation. So his implements are 40 feet wide, meaning he can make 2 exact passes. So actually our trees are planted 90 feet apart, where our alleys are actually 10 feet wide. So essentially we have a 5-foot wide tractor that drives on either side of the alleyway. And then you got your tree row dead in the middle. And I can pretty much in just 2 passes take care of this entire alley row with the 5-foot wide tractor. And that's really important to remember as well, is when you're designing these systems, is how wide you need your management width, especially in an organic setting where spraying is not allowed. How you're going to manage that ground cover becomes really critical, especially in the early establishment period of the tree crops. This site is really interesting, where we have this glacial till soil on the uplands, and as further down, you can see in this topographical map to the west, you get more deep, well-drained silt loams. So there are some challenges there with tree survival and planting. We had with some of the chestnuts for sure on the glacial till they weren't as happy with, mostly around soil moisture retention in the establishment phase. But also with some of the runoff, some of the challenges and interesting things that we noted with the challenges. This site, I'll go back, has a number of different, these lines in here represents some of the flow paths. This is a kind of a digitally generated flow path map. It might not be as entirely accurate as what you can see on the landscape. And here in this image, you can see there's kind of 3 main concentrated bypass flows that run off the landscape. And in major runoff events, you do see some erosion, especially within the alleys. And one of the really cool things that I found this year, and unfortunately I didn't get a good picture of it because it was actually during this time period, we had about 3 or 4 inch rainstorm the night before. And there was a pretty tremendous amount of runoff that was coming down out of this field right before planting. But these alley crop rows basically stifled the runoff from actually running down across into the different alleys. So the erosion was really just in between alleys. So here, this is why the ground cover is really important, especially in the early establishment period, where you have this coupled herbaceous ground cover and tree root system that can really help with the sediment nutrient trapping as it moves down across the landscape. So this was a huge success. Unfortunately, I really wish I got a picture of that while I was doing that. Mark, I noticed right when Mark was starting to cultivate and replow the fields or redisc the fields after that rain event. So I didn't get a great picture of it, but I swear it happened. So again, ultimately, the idea with this site is that this would allow for a number of years, at least 10, 15 years of continued alley cropping. And now the one challenge is as the trees get larger, the alley width gets narrower and narrower. So currently Mark is making double passes for cultivation and planting, but at maybe year 10 or 15, he might only be doing a single pass. But there is still opportunity for haying on either side as his cultivated area gets narrower and narrower. The either side of that allows for potential for haying. And then ultimately at year 20, 30, when the chestnuts get mature and the timber crop gets more mature, ideally this site would go to a full perennial system where it's full grass, pasture mix. Livestock can be grazed in here. And we're already talking about the potential for bringing livestock onto the site to help start grazing some of the post-harvest material and maybe even starting converting some of these areas to perennial grasses. So on to windbreaks, and sorry I'm moving super fast through here. I really want to get to this Q&A section quick. So if folks are burning with questions, give me a few more minutes. So the windbreak, as mentioned, this site it's constantly windy. Almost every day, whether it's stormy or bluebird skies, it's constantly windy. And the site, because it's a pretty heavy glacial till in a lot of the fields, it's extremely well drained. And the wind also enhances the kind of the droughtiness of the soil type there. Plus with the years of conventional row cropping, a lot of the organic matter has been kind of mined out of the site. So the windbreaks that we're looking at putting in are really to help with soil retention and moisture retention. In general, because this is a organic system, we're really looking to enhance the biological activity of the soil, which of course is enhanced with one, diversity, but two, soil moisture. So we planted the windbreak on the west side. The prevailing winds come from the west and move across the landscape. It was decided by the community to plant a really thick row of American plums on the windward side. And then the second row is alternating hybrid poplar for that really quick windbreak, and white oak for the long-term windbreak. And then moving towards the east, we have 2 rows of black currants. And that way you get this kind of tapered windbreak. You start low with the American plums, you move up to a full canopy tree species, and then kind of back down with black currants. And we're talking about potentially putting in a few more shrub rows in there too, possibly hazelnuts and that sort of thing to kind of help with that kind of tapered effect of moving the wind through the windbreak, which the windbreaks don't move the wind by pushing the wind up and over the fields. It's part of their action, but a lot of their action is really the porosity of the windbreak. The windbreak here is also really important because due directly across from the driveway, maybe 50 feet over, is a conventional crop farm. So there is considerable amount of pesticide and herbicide drift, that move across the field here. So this windbreak is really meant to be a dense, porous windbreak. So the wind is actually meant to move through the windbreak, not necessarily up and over, but more so through it, so that the windbreak can actually capture the chemical particulates that are moving through the windbreak before they reach the organically certified field. And this is really important for organic certification, but all the other kind of benefits that we're hoping to get out of it over time. The other interesting thing about this project is that the community really wanted a demonstration site of some of the alternative cropping species that can be planted in this area. Also to kind of enhance the beauty and the landscaping of the farmstead and the future agricultural education facility that is hoping to be planted or built on site just north of the food forest garden. We call this actually the tasting orchard because it's a really high diversity of different tree and cane and not quite yet vining crops, but hopefully soon vining crops. But a lot of really unique things like Shapovas and mountain ash, hardy pecans, Ukrainian almonds, a few other kinds of chestnuts and pawpaws, apricots, Asian pears, cherries, honeyberries, yastas, all the kind of fun things that you can kind of think of as you go through a nursery catalog. We got it in there to kind of experiment and see how they do. One, to look at their survivability and yield, but two, also just provide that community space for people to enjoy and self-harvest from and learn all the new potential crops and historic indigenous crops that are from this area that we should really be making a nod to during all of this work, that a lot of this is borrowed from the indigenous management that's been happening on this site. So all the trees that we've been planting here, we've been using a system called the planted tree tubes. This is a fantastic new system that really, well, not new, it's relatively old, but a newer design that we're working with and we're really happy with for deterring deer, but also just kind of enhancing the microclimates of the trees and survivability of the trees. So the planter tree tubes are, they use a fiberglass stake, which is really great because honestly, in mowing, I have run over a few of these tree tubes with trees in them, and the fiberglass stake actually folds over and bounces right back in place. And the two times I actually accidentally did it, the trees had no damage whatsoever from them, versus a wood stake, it would have snapped, the tree would have snapped, and we would have lost that tree. But with the fiberglass stake, it really does bounce right back. And you can't actually even tell the ones I ran over, so I shouldn't actually admit to this. Another thing I really like about this system is they use rubberized twist ties as opposed to plastic zip ties. The rubberized twist ties do not degrade in the UV or in the sunlight. So the rubberized twist ties, it can be removed really easy. They're just incredibly easy to work with. The tubes slide right off the fiberglass stake and then right back on. So it's really easy to work with. And then of course, with most tree tubes, there's bird netting on the top that kind of helps prevent birds from landing on the tree tubes and dropping mulberry and other seeds into the tree tubes to kind of compete with the trees. So the systems worked really, really well for us. And as you can see here, we're after year one, we're actually looking in spring to start removing a lot of the tree tubes off the poplars. They grew incredibly fast. And with those, we will have to cut off. But with some of the other trees, like the black walnuts and the American plums in the spring, we're hoping to just slide right off. And they'll be kind of set to their own devices at that point. Some of the big challenges that I wanted to speak to, one of the big challenges, this is an organic site. So, you know, a use of herbicide for weed management is not possible, even in emergency situations. So again, this is the importance of good ground cover implementation. We were really successful with the ground cover implementation, except in the area with the currents, and largely too using the tree planter. You plant the ground cover and then you run the tree planter, which creates this furrow, which can disturb the ground cover if it's not timed really well. Ultimately, what happened with this site is that the ground cover was planted with a gap about a foot wide where the currants were to be planted. And in doing so, it unfortunately left a pretty major weedy gap where, you know, this coming out of conventional ag and into an organic system, the weed pressures are extremely high. So we're having some challenges with the success, the early establishment success of the currants on this site, given that. And, you know, ideally we would establish the ground cover and planted the currants directly in the ground cover and been much more easily able to manage the Dutch white clover as opposed to foxtail millets and thistles and that sort of thing. We're still competing with deer browse, even though we have the plant tubes. These are 5 feet tall, and the deer still are able to get and nip the tops of these. This is a big challenge with the bird netting. You want to get the bird netting off before the trees grow, but then you expose that apical leader directly to the browse height of the deer. But for the most part, we're not seeing too much damage. There is some on the American plums that are, getting directly hit because it's the first row of trees coming out of that conventional field. But they're fast growing enough that they seem to be taking off just fine. But it's something that we're definitely considering in terms of, combining the tree tube size to the species type, something like poplar that grows so fast, but can get hit really, really quickly. And same with, American plums and other things, maybe going for a 6-foot tube or something might be something we want to consider. Another interesting challenge, which was, it's hard to conceive in the ideological phase of designing an alley crop system, is that transition zone between the organic management and the alley crop row, so the ground cover. These seem to be very clearly well-defined lines, but, as with any cropping system, even a few inches of uncultivated ground or that transition zone can lead to an explosion of weeds, and this system is no short of that. So you can kind of see here the 4 feet of perfect ground cover, and then about a foot of uncultivated ground where this foxtail millet has kind of taken a sure hold there. So it kind of leads a big dance between Mark and I when he's cultivating and me coming back through, and maybe sometimes doing a second pass on either side of the alleys just to kind of help hit these areas that maybe not exactly in the ground cover planted zone, and not exactly within his planted zone. They might have to hit with the mower or weed whacker. It really hasn't been that big of a problem, but if let go, it can become a big problem. And it's something I've been watching out for pretty regularly. So again, ultimately what we're looking to do is use this site and sites like this to demonstrate across the community what kind of changes we can make in your community, and see if the community likes it. I mean, right now the field looks like just a bunch of plastic tree tubes, but over the next 5-10 years, I think folks will be able to see the site really come alive and really start to understand the organic system a little bit more, and the diversity that is playing within this organic production system that Mark's doing, and then the tree crop system that we're doing. And as we learn and combine our partnerships and enhance our partnerships better, it's a good way for us to help re-envision what we might want our communities and landscapes to look like. And as part of that, this year, Savannah Institute is working directly with NRCS. We have a cooperative agreement to work to help implement NRCS practices across the landscape. Wisconsin is extremely innovative and proactive in this role. So there are resources with NRCS starting in fiscal year 2021 to implement a number of alley cropping systems, and Savannah Institute can help you with that, with site visits, planting design, and even some financial investment opportunity to kind of help make that happen. So we're putting the word out that if you're in Southwest Wisconsin, or specifically a tribal entity in northern Wisconsin, we'd like to devote resources to you guys to start planting the systems out on larger scales across the landscape. So reach out to me if you have any questions on that specifically, and we can see if we can help you out on that. So right now I'm gonna kind of open it up to Q&A. We got about 25 minutes left in the hour. And so hopefully we get some good conversations out of this. So let's see if I can find the chat box. I don't see any questions. Does anybody have any questions they might, or is everybody able to get to the chat box? All right, silence. Oh no, there you go. What about conifers in the windbreak? That is a great question. I really wish there were conifers in the windbreak. I'm not exactly sure why conifers were not decided in the windbreak. I think for depending on the design and the ultimate intentional outcome for that field, conifers can really work against some systems. One, increasing acidity, but two, really kind of enhancing the shade. However, the benefits that come out of using conifers on a site is pretty tremendous, especially for increasing the increasing the waft of the wind that's coming across the field. So pushing the wind higher above the field in the landscape, or in a graze setting, really providing what's called a living barn or a microclimate on the leeward side of the wind. So that can really help in enhance livestock health. In this case, conifers can be a little bit tricky when you're trying to use it for drift, chemical drift mitigation. For an effective windbreak design for drift, you really want to have a kind of engineered percentage of wind moving through, of wind and that chemical drift moving through that windbreak in order for the windbreak to physically trap the drift that's moving through, as opposed to push it to waft it above the field and over and out. That's not necessarily doing that ecosystem service. So ultimately, I don't know why they decided against the conifers, but that's how I've always thought of it, because that was my big question when I came out to the site too, is where are the conifers for a windbreak? But in my mind, that might have actually prevented that really good drift prevention through the field if it was a high density of conifers planted. So John mentioned, so John Stennis is the president of the Friends Group. So John is out there working tirelessly every single day, figuring out and resolving problems left and right. So big nod to John and all his work. And of course, the whole Friends Group, but John is here with us today, it seems like, also Barb as well, and a few others. But so John is asking to discuss the timing of getting farm animals into the system. That is a really good question. With alley cropping, you can do it right away. Ultimately, our goal is to see 100% perenniality in the system. And perenniality can look a number of different ways. There are perennial grains that are being worked on and developed. They're not quite ready for broad scale implementation, but we should be experimenting with that. But also perennial foraging or fodder production systems. So growing hay, pasture, alfalfa, and that sort of thing. And in those contexts, livestock can be brought in pretty much right away. Similarly, after, post-harvest, a lot of farmers are grazing cover crop plantings or harvesting the stubble that's coming off the harvested, or grazing the stubble that's coming off the harvested field. So there's nothing really to prevent getting livestock into an alley cropping system right away. And ultimately, the system should be tailored to, especially an organic system, where you raise a crop and you put a cover crop down, and in the spring you put livestock in to graze the cover crop down, to kind of help with that conversion of biomass into plant available nutrients and organic matter, and then plant the season's crop post grazing into that. I think that's kind of the ultimate system, but it really would depend on, what is your infrastructure? Already the cost implementation of cropping is kind of different than the costs associated with grazing systems. So getting a livestock watering system out there, getting fencing out there. So it really all depends on your scale. Vegetable systems already tend to have irrigation and water. We actually have irrigation water out of here that's temporary, that can be moved there during the growing season, but not in the off season, which poses challenging for overwintering animals on this site. But fencing is always a big expense and a big challenge. So, a lot of these systems, especially at this kind of scale, as the system really should be designed to evolve. So in the early days, the annual cropping system is the big moneymaker. As the tree crops really start coming in and start, reducing that annual crop revenue, but the tree crop revenue starts increasing, that's a good time to start transitioning investments away from cropping equipment and into more livestock infrastructure, and then converting areas to perennial systems, and then ultimately into a potential grazing system. But again, this is all ideal in an ideal scenario that we can speak about. Alley crop systems can also, as you can see from the picture that's up right now, can be done in perpetuity. You can really design the system so that you can always crop the alleys. And there are certainly some competition challenges between the annuals and the tree crops, but when paired well, maybe not in a black walnut cropping system, but with the chestnut cropping system or black locust or a number of other tree crops, there's differences with that annual crop to tree crop competition. So ultimately, you could really do the annual cropping as long as the farmer desires. So I hope that answers that question well. The answer to everything in this is it really depends. This site in particular, I think we would love to see animals get out there right away. Of course, we want to work with Mark Dudla. He's again a fantastic partner to work with. So all of this needs to work in tandem with his needs and what he wants to see on this site as well. This is a community process. We have another fantastic partner out on the site, Dan Cornelius, who's a Oneida tribal member. He's doing a lot of really cool stuff working with maintaining ancient seed cultivars. And he's also grazing on site. It sounds like he's bringing some cattle on site this year to kind of start that grazing process. So we're really hoping to start working with him more as well and start looking at how we can start kind of partnering and designing these systems of grazing, and he can bring his livestock into this system and kind of see where that conversation goes and really work with him on his perspective on how we can enhance these systems and how that would work more for his community engagement as well. Next question is, has there been consideration of adding mushrooms, especially in mulch around the apples, as something added for people to potentially eat but also benefit from? That would be fantastic. Yes, that's really easy to do, especially something with King Stropharia. It's something that would over time work really well. Currently, the site is a little too exposed and a little too dry. The soils are rather droughty, and this is obviously very season dependent, but it is a big open field with full solar exposure and full wind exposure 24/7. So the ground dries up pretty hard. We actually have a lot of challenges with that in terms of infiltration of water and not to mention just soil or moisture retention. So over time, as the trees start to grow and the canopy starts to form, I think this would be an excellent site for adding some log culture, inoculating logs and start staging around and underneath the orchard. But then also start, inoculating the wood chips that are added to the tasting orchard. Ideally, that would be done right away, but I've seen it successfully done pretty much any time throughout time. Anytime you add wood chips, you're going to get some kind of fungal dominance there in the soil in that rhizosphere area. So it is definitely possible. In the alley crop system, it's a little bit too big of scale to be adding wood chips, which is why we prefer the ground cover. Plus, it's a living system. Wood chips has its place and its benefits, but the living ground cover with mowing, you're adding the organic matter back on site while also actually enhancing the erosion mitigation potential and the kind of nutrient cycling potential than wood chips might. So in a large, and plus it's just really not practical for a few people to go out and try to add wood chips to 1,000 row feet times 9 rows. So in this case, the mushroom production would be really well suited for that tasting orchard. So the next question. Also you added, and also to benefit the trees. Yeah, so a lot of the mushrooms that are produced for edible consumption are saprophytes. So they're actually going to be breaking down the wood chips. So the benefit to the tree is, of course, the organic matter and the mulching itself, and that's going to come naturally with all wood chips are going to be inoculated with the fungal pressure or dominance, so to speak. One idea that a lot of folks are doing is inoculating something like hazelnuts, but can be done with oaks and other hardwood species, inoculating with truffle species. And this is done all over Canada. I have not, I'm sure people are doing it here in Wisconsin. I'm still brand new to this community, so I'm still learning the lay of the land. So sorry if I'm not giving a nod to anybody doing this cool stuff, but that would be a really awesome thing to try as well. That does have kind of a the beneficial relationship there. But typically with mycorrhizal inoculations within wood chips, they're usually done at the planting stage. They're usually done even at the nursery stage when you're really trying to ensure the mycorrhizal relationships are there that directly benefits the trees. Kind of happens right away. That's really, really hard, if not impossible, to do after planting because the soil already has its array of biology already going. Oh, and John did mention that Silverwood sponsors mushroom log workshops. That they collect the wood from the oak savanna restoration. And so they're actively doing these sorts of workshops and community engagement processes where you can come and plug mushroom logs, and also take some home. So that's a great way to plug in, literally, and learn a lot about this and enhance the mushroom production system at this site over time. Kathy asked, you're focused on Southwest Wisconsin. Any interest in Southeast Wisconsin, Jefferson County? Yes, I think so. Like I said, I'm still new here, so I'm still getting used to the jargon of Wisconsin, or really the geography of Wisconsin. So I think Jefferson County is definitely possible. I'd say reach out to me and let's see, let's connect and see what we can do. You know, the NRCS programs are offered across the entire state, so there's no limitation for gaining access to that. You know, our focus will work over the next couple of years. You know, we have limited staffing hours, so we're pretty focused, trying to stay geographically focused, but it doesn't mean we can't help out and connect you with some people that can really help to kind of engage with those resources. Rosina asked a really great question. Is there a minimum land size that this would work on? Absolutely not. You know, this is why the food forest example is a great idea, because it's just a small kind of half-acre site with a tremendous amount of diversity in there. And you could still raise chickens under there. You know, you could still grow vegetable gardens, especially in the early days of that orchard. You know, you could take a quarter or half-acre market garden in every 5 vegetable bed rows, add a row of apple trees, dwarf apple trees that stay a few feet tall. You know, these ideas are scalable pretty much to any size, even for a backyard system you can do as well. Or it can be, you know, what our program, you know, part of the goal of Savannah Institute is really to supplant corn and soy as a monoculture across the landscape. So we're really, really interested in looking at these larger systems and thinking about, you know, can we do this at 1,000 acres, 3,000 acres? And so really, you know, to answer that question, yeah, you can really do it across, you can do it across all the different scales. There really is no barrier to, you know, this is the historic, the indigenous way of cultivating food and managing common lands across the entire globe. So these systems are represented in every scale, in every way, shape, or form. You know, we're just remembering really how to do this, and hoping that we can kind of re-engage the community to kind of look back at these systems and do this at any scale. Is the food forest organic, including apples? Yes, everything on this site is organic. So yeah, that's a really good question, and certainly going to pose some really big challenges, especially for chestnut production, or any of the, you know, these large kind of tree crop systems that do already have large pest pressures. Chestnuts are very well known for their pest and disease pressures, of course, with the American chestnut blight, which is why we're focusing on Chinese genetics there. Though we do have a lot of American hybrids in there for the cold tolerance, but also for gall wasp and chestnut weevil and all these other pests that are moving in and have been in the area and are posing big challenges, especially for organic production systems. And yeah, there's a lot to be learned there for sure. There's a lot of idealisms and a lot of research that can be done, and a lot of that we're hoping to continue working with, which is why, working with these common lands and these park systems and community engagement is incredibly important, because we get to kind of really experiment with all these ideas and have other people come up with cool potential solutions and experiment with them as well. And yeah, see what happens, see what we can learn from these. Oh, when will it be available on YouTube? Oh man, I'm making a debut on YouTube. That's not, I don't really know enough to be on YouTube. I don't know when it'll be on YouTube. I don't even know how to do that. But Michelle is incredibly tech savvy, who you met earlier in the conversation. And she'll make it available. I'll check in with her on that. I think she is off the call currently. Or off the webinar currently. So I think I would say within the week or within the month. Let's say within the month. But it's most likely going to pop up right away. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that one. But I would definitely check the Savannah site. And usually it'll pop up either on the Savannah site or our YouTube channel. All right, I was able to get through that presentation and with enough time for some Q&A, but we still have more time. Does anybody else have any burning questions or ridicule, criticism, checking our idealisms, or anything that they, any lessons learned that they might have if they've implemented these systems and what they might want to share? I think in the meantime, before anything comes up, I just want to add, it really has been quite a pleasure to get to know the Friends of Silverwood group, as well as Dane County Parks and their support for these systems, and their willingness to invest in these ideas and invest in the communities to provide places like this. My background, I spent a lot of time with extension and conservation districts and working for the USDA and a number of states across the country, and the innovativeness of the park systems here in Wisconsin is incredibly inspiring. This is stuff we've been talking about for decades, and parks are and county programs are still struggling and grappling with the idea. And Dane County and other counties across the state have done it and are doing it, and are finding these kind of novel ways for communal land management. And again, to make a nod, this is tribal territory, and they're struggling for their recognition of these lands and their way of being, and not at all we're looking to appropriate those ideas, but to put the land back into commonplace and put the land back into the ownership of the public, the management of the public, and the ability for the public to re-engage is to kind of make an acknowledgement that their ideals and their systems have some incredible important value that we should recognize and consider moving forward. So I'm hoping to see more of that across everywhere, but I'm really hoping that we can continue with these ideals and these partnerships going forward on this site, but also many others across the state. Okay. Few more questions. Any person demo farm field days planned for 2021? Good question. I don't know. We really hope so, but COVID is really bad in our area. We want to make sure that the things we do with safety 100% in mind. So unfortunately, we might have to stick to some of these virtual field days. I do not, so Katie Adams is the mastermind behind all the demo sites in Illinois, and she would be the best one to work with to tour any of those. She has an incredible wealth of knowledge that surpasses mine. So I would just stay tuned, or if you can, check in with her on that. I know we really want to make that happen, but I think time will really tell. And really glad to hear that there's another demo site in Northern Illinois. We're getting more and more popping up. It's super exciting to see how many folks are coming out of the woodwork to on their private lands to help kind of push this movement forward. This is really, really exciting. Leslie is asking, can you encapsulate what you are planning into the system to be flexible going into climate changes? Yeah, chestnuts. Chestnuts, I think is a big one. I think we're going to see, a lot of the data shows that there's trending to definitely species movement and preferential movement across the landscape. And this provides a whole opportunity for us to grow species that tend to do better in southern climates. So that is the purpose of the chestnut varietal trials, really looking at cold tolerance and winter survivability here in the north, and working with some of those that have been doing this for 30 years. Phil Rudder at Badger Set, Mark Shepard at New Forest Farm, and Tom Wall at Red Fern Farm in Iowa. Really doing a lot of the breeding work. And same with University of Missouri, doing a lot of breeding work for northern cold tolerance of chestnuts. So that's just one example. I mean, we can really treat that with a lot of other crops, pawpaws, persimmons. The tasting orchard is really experimenting with a lot of different orchard crops and crop potentials to really see what is possible in this area, while also prioritizing and exploring the native species that are here, elderberries and hazelnuts and service berries and things like that. A lot of what we do is focus on woody tree planting to supplant the annual cropping systems in order to enhance the carbon sequestration. So the climate change conversation around agroforestry is probably 5 webinars in of itself. But it's something, I mean, this is the importance of the work that we're hoping to do in partnering with the farming community and the public lands community, is really start to think about how we manage land as we go into a lot of climate variability, and also to kind of help with, drawdown projects. And that sort of thing. But I can wax poetically all day on that topic, but there's also a lot better other people out there that can speak to that much more articulately than can I. Can we get the presentation? Yeah, it will be posted on YouTube. And there should be a link to it popping up at some point on YouTube. And that would be probably the best way to share it. So glad it was worthwhile. And I think with that, we're just on time. My contact here, I should have shared that the whole time. My contact is eric@savannahинstitute.org. That's Eric with a K. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about this site. Get out to Silverwood if you can. Go enjoy the scene, volunteer if you can, participate in their workshops as they get the chance to host them again. And support your county parks and start engaging in communal land management. I'm super thrilled to be part of it, and to learn a whole lot more from all the folks that are out there doing this. So with that, thanks so much for all of your time and willingness to sit through my rambles. Wish this was much more of a field in-person event where we can actually talk and not just hear me ramble on and on for an hour. But yeah, looking forward to having everybody out, hopefully sometime next year. Yeah, take care.